Welcome back. We are MDEV1001 in the summer 2023 semester at Georgian, and it's week 3, part 2 of our broadcast and recording together. And again, we're recording this strictly on YouTube. And let's see how this is going to go. Where last we left off, we discussed our assignment 1, which is something that I would do from last week. And I want to move into the topics for this week. Local data source types, which I want to talk about very briefly. SQLite platform comparison, Android versus iOS. You're going to see that there are issues and there are ways of dealing with them. And then how do we create inquiry local data sources? We're kind of doing that now with we kind of started that in class exercise 3 already. All right, so let's get back into what we were doing, which is this. So where last we left off, we had this, and we said, it's not really ready, but there's still some things we need to do. So what do we do? How do I change my movie ID into an auto incrementing key? How do I do that, right? I want to alter a column. That's what I want to do. That's the hint. So, hey, let's use ChatGPT. All right, so ChatGPT. You guys are going to do it, right? Here's Chat OpenAI, right? And my session's expired. I'll log in. I usually log in with my, Chrome. And, yep, sure. And then, what you can do with it, and here's what's acceptable to me when you do something with ChatGPT, is you kind of put in what you're looking for. So you say, I need to alter a column in a SQLite 3 table to make it an auto-incrementing primary key. So let's see what it does. Right? That doesn't tell me that's not right. Right? So what it said,
it would probably technically work, but
yeah,
it's a weird way to do it.
So what it did was it said, so here's my new table, column 1, column 2, right? And then here's my ID, integer primary key auto increment, right? Which is kind of what we did, right? And then replace new table with the name of your existing table, transfer the data from your old table to the new table, insert into table, select other column from old table. This is pretty cool. This is a transferring thing. What I mean is, it didn't quite get what I wanted. I need to alter a column in an existing SQLite 3 table. Okay, so now let's alter the message. We'll say, no, I meant an existing column in a table, in an existing table, right? Please regenerate with this detail. Let's see what it says. And it's a lot of times very polite. It says, like, I apologize for the confusion, right? And it says, create a temporary table with desired schema. Still didn't do it right? And then it says, alter the table, right, to do this. And it says, look, here's my table, and then I'm not transferring data. Okay, no. I'm not transferring data from another table. I want to keep the table intact. I just want to change one of the columns into the primary key, right? I mean, this isn't it. No, right? So this isn't the way, guys. All right. So I mentioned this to you because, like, look, I was pretty specific on what I wanted to do, right? So the first thing I said was, when I did my search, I need to alter a column in a SQLite 3 table to make it an auto-incremented primary key. That's what I said, right? So I can keep going. One thing that you'll notice is there's diminishing returns every time you do this. Because I mean, I could have done one search on Google to give me the same thing. So let's try Google now. So if I try it again, I say like convert, existing column SQLite 3 to primary key. That's a different search that I used, right? But let's see what it did. Let's see what ChatGPT gives me over here, right? And it says, so actually, this is like you, Hitesh. I think you gave me this, right? Where there's the extension. Wasn't it you?
No. Even I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh, what?
Yeah, there's actually an extension for ChatGPT that you can do it side by each, right? And I believe that extension it's the extension. Just look for ChatGPT extension for Google Chrome, and it'll actually do it side by each, just like this, right? And I don't think it's a bad thing. At least you can compare both side by side. One thing is it expects you to have an account. It actually links to your Gmail account. So that way, if I go back to my ChatGPT, this one, you can see that it has all the chats that I've kind of put in there on the side. It keeps track of them all. So you could do that, and you could use this. One thing that it doesn't do like modifications. It says less chat, right? So I'm sure if I put that in there, it'll allow me to modify my search. But it says SQLite add primary key. Let's try this. So you can't modify SQLite tables in a significant way after they've been created. The accepted suggestion is to create a new table with the correct requirements and copy your data into it, and then drop the old table, which is what ChatGPT told me to do. And I'm like, hey, no, I don't want that. No, right? But why? Because what this is showing us is this: once a schema has been created, right? It can't be modified. So that's what this answer is, right? And it says, so here's the example. Here's my table, and then I want to make, I want to add a primary key here. That's not really what I want to do. I want to convert a my primary key, right? It says, all right, I tried to add the primary key after I changed it to blah, blah, blah. Then I began to do the following, right? And da-da-da. Okay, but that's not what I really wanted to do. I already have data in my table that I inserted from a CSV file, and I want to convert that to a primary key. How do I do that? So let's go back to this drawing board. Okay, ChatGPT. This is not what I want. I have an existing column in a table named movie ID. The movie ID column has integers, integer data, right? The entire database has been imported from a CSV file. I want to convert the movie ID column, which is currently text, to an integer primary key that is auto-incrementing. Can this be done? Okay, so what it says is you have to do it in this order. Okay, so create a table, which is the original table backup, as select star from original table. So basically what you're doing is taking everything from the original table as a backup and saving it into a backup table. That's what it's doing, okay? And that is the original table backup. And then you're going to create a table, a temp table, which is going to have the new ID, integer primary key, auto increment, okay? And then some other columns, okay? Yeah, no problem. And then transfer into the data from the original table to the temporary table. insert into temp table, blah, 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 select other columns from original table backup, drop the original table, alter the table, temp table rename to original table, yes. Now the movie ID column will be replaced with a new auto increment. No, that's not true. That's not true. Please note that converting an existing column to an auto-incremented primary key requires creating a backup of the original table, creating a temporary table, transferring the data, and renaming the table. It's always recommended to have a backup of your database before making any changes. Okay. Is there a way to import a CSV file or data from a CSV file and make the first column an auto-incrementing primary key? That's easier, right? I mean, instead of doing all these, like this crazy stuff, right? Yes, you can import data from a CSV file into a SQLite table and make the first column an incrementing primary key. Here's how you do it. Ensure that you have SQLite installed and blah, blah, blah. Create a new table in SQLite with the desired schema, including an auto-incremented primary key column. Okay, right? For example, and then replace your table with the desired table name, and then mode CSV, import your data CSV to your table. But here, what we'd want to do is, like we said before, remove the header. That's what this would do, right? Remove the header from this thing altogether. And why? Because we're already making the schema. So that's one thing to do. Make your schema first. A little bit more work, right? But what this does is it imports everything, and you can kind of just describe all of your things. And I think this is the way, guys. I wouldn't do this jumping around and deleting one thing and moving in, taking this data and moving it over. Like on the downside, there's a downside to this. The downside is you have to actually put in your schema appropriately with all the names, and where the other thing actually modified the schema for us, right? Which is kind of good. Right, it's a good thing to do. You know, the other thing to do if you want to be really tricky, right, about it is, you know, that because I mean CSV all comes across as text. That's the negative thing, unless you do this, and that's kind of what it said here, right? So it said that there's a couple ways to do this, right? And it said that here's your verified import, and then you can drop the table. And then what it says is second, use the following create table statement to create the table cities and then import into it, which is exactly what it said here. And, you know, because as a Chukwu, you're probably going to say the exact same thing, which is you didn't read the document, Tom, which is it's right here. The entire thing on how to do everything is right here. And the answer is you're right. There is no easy way of doing it. And that's why I'm mentioning it here, because that would be bad. Okay. Does that make sense? So I'm going through this with you because people are going to find funny ways of doing stuff. And I also want to show you how I use ChatGPT, which is if ever I do a search for anything, like if I say something like, you know, ChatGPT, I need a UI for Android, you know, to connect to a SQLite database, you know, as an example. How do I do that? You know, then I go through the steps, and sometimes ChatGPT will give you the right answer, but it's not exactly what you're thinking it is, and you doubt it. You're like, no, it can't be. And then, but actually, right, it wasn't wrong, right? It basically told me what to do. Okay.
So is that a SQLite thing where it doesn't have an alter table? Like it doesn't have that command? You can't do that at all?
Which alter? It does. You can alter the table, but you can't alter. You
But
can
just not the primary key.
Well, so there's another thing you could do. Okay, so here's something else. We could drop a column here. So let's see. So here, let's go back to this. So, okay, how do you drop a column from a SQLite table? Right? How do I drop a column from a SQLite table? Right? And then it's going to say, create a backup of your database, right? And it says, you know, create table as, and then drop table old, alter table, new table, rename to old table, blah, blah, blah. Now the column you want to drop will be effectively removed from the old table because we are basically selecting only the columns that you want to drop from the old table, and that's the thing you do. Alternatively, kill the movie ID from your CSV file. That's another option, right? And then you alter the table, which I'm going to show you later on, and make that the auto-incrementing ID, right? And then it would add all the auto-incrementing stuff on top of it automatically, and that's another way of doing it, right? So get the data, and then just add another, and alter that's what you're saying, Eric. You can alter the table, and once you've altered the table, you add a column, because it doesn't have a column, and then you make it auto-incrementing, and it should automatically list everything as is. Okay, because really we don't have that, right? Like right now we don't have a primary key. We'd have to add one anyway, right? And in fact, we could. How about this? How do you rename? How do you rename a column in SQLite 3? How do you do that? How do you read that? And let's just copy the table, make it. That's what I was going to say. Here it is. Look, create a new table. Right, create a backup of your database, right? Create a table with the desired schema, including the renamed column. You can use the create table as, right? And it says drop the old table and then, go back and alter the table, rename to the old table, right? So, I mean, that's an issue. I can't rename the column any easier than this, right? The answer is no, right? So, I mean, it is what it is. So the easier way to do it is if I was going to add and, kind of not include in my Excel spreadsheet. So I would say, okay, so here's my movie ID and stuff. Remove this, like that's what I'm saying. Remove this column altogether, right, in my Excel spreadsheet, and then import everything except for the movie ID column in there. And then after you do that movie ID, it'll auto increment it for you because you're adding in data. That's what you're doing. You don't care about that column, which is not a bad thing. And then, you could effectively keep adding to this little file that I've given you, your own movies and stuff like that for your assignment 1, and then put it in. Again, we're just talking about, tactics for how to do this thing. So it saves you time and also gets you to learn a little bit about what to do. For all of this and more, remember, we can always look at SQLite documentation online, SQLite documentation, which is basically here under SQLite.com or .org. Here it is, right? So whenever you want to do, anything like that, where here's the documentation piece. And if you look at things like, keyword index, if I look for something like alter or SQL, here's SQL syntax on the right-hand side. And then here's alter table. This is really interesting. It's really good the way this works. So it says alter table rename, right? Alter table rename column. Okay, so it's a rename a column to syntax changes the column name, table name into new column name. The column name is changed both within the table definition itself and also within all indexes, triggers, and everything else. Alter table and then rename column is what we want to use, right? So this is how it works. And it'd be nice if we had, this option because, I mean, I don't want to go and copy stuff around from one thing to the other, right? So it'd be nice also if we had the syntax, new column name. It says the rename column to syntax changes the column name of table name into new column name, right? So you can also alter a table to add column, right? So that's what it does. And then it says, if you have foreign key constraints, the column may not have a primary key or unique constraint, right? So to add a column, syntax is used to add a column to an existing table. The new column is always appended to the end of the list, and the column definition rule defines the characteristics of the new column. New column may take any form permissible in create table statement with the following restrictions. It may not have a primary key or unique constraint. So you can't add a primary key. Can't make it a primary key. And that's why ChatGPT says, no, can't do that, Tom. Can't, even if things that we thought about, we can't do because it doesn't allow you. Alter table drop column, it says the column, can't do that if the column is a primary key or part of one. The column has a unique constraint. The column is indexed. The column is named in the where clause of a partial index and blah, 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 right? So it tells you stuff that you can do and you can't do here, right? Which is pretty good. So yeah, right? So you can't add a column I can't add a column that's a primary key. I can't do that. I'd have to make a brand new table and then import the table from one thing to the other, and then it's going to have the primary key in there, right? Or do what we did, which is the hard part, right? Here's something else. Can we use it, just the header as the schema? That's all I want. I want the header as a schema for my CSV file, right? And then the rest of the data I'll add in after, like a two-step. Let's see if I can do that. So, import CSV file header as schema for SQLite, right? So it says, well, it's the same thing for the tutorial. And look, ChatGPT is kind of running side by each again. It says install the SQLite module, right? It says import CSV. It doesn't tell you where it is because this is Python, right? So it's in Python here. And then, it's telling me how to do stuff. And I can say, let's chat, and then say, no, I want this without Python, right? To see how this works. And you can see that's interactive, right? So this is it right here. Look, so it does everything. And then it kind of does everything that it's going to do. Okay. Questions around this? So I think there's some things we talked about because I wanted to help you out. That's why I went through this process. I also wanted to give you some keywords that you can search. I also want to show you what's acceptable to use with ChatGPT. Here's what I don't expect you guys to be at the end of this course. I don't expect you to remember anything, like in terms of SQLite commands. I don't think that's reasonable, right? Because most of the times, guys, right, I think the basics you should know. You should know how to select star from table. You should know how to do that. That's easy. But the other stuff, I mean, if you want to do some special thing, like you're going to learn with your assignment 1, you should be able to look it up with reasonable, something on YouTube or whatever. And I'm not going to test you on it like so that it's like you're memorizing it because you're not database programmers. This program is not about databases. It's about programming. And so I'm going to allow you to use all the tools at your disposal, just like I would or you would in a real world scenario. Okay, that's how I'm going to do it. Okay, so I know some other professors might be like, oh my God, he's showing them how to use ChatGPT and he's accepting it. Yes, I am, because it's a tool. I don't care, right? All right, let's move on. So that's that kind of stuff that we talked about. And we have part of it. And what I'm going to do to get you to do for your in-class exercise 3 for this week is I want you to figure it out, what the best thing is for you. This is your in-class exercise 3. I'm already giving it to you, right? Which is you got the data. You don't have to normalize. You have it in, right? I want you to add in as a precursor to your assignment 1. I want you to add in your 10 movies, okay? Add it into my Excel spreadsheet here, all right? It's an easy exercise. Go through your 10 movies, and let's suppose, I don't know, Hitesh, give me one of your favorite movies. I know I'm going through a little bit deeper, but I'm saying, yeah, you got your image here. Maybe Eric, if you want to come back on, or, so you can tell me. Go ahead. What's your favorite movie? I'm gonna use IMDb. Go.
One of them would be Shutter Island.
What is it?
Shutter Island.
Shutter?
Shutter Island.
Put it in the chat so I can spell it properly. Shutter Island. Okay, I thought so. So if I go Shutter Island, all right, there it is. So Shutter Island, and this is the one. Is that the one?
Let me 1 second.
So is this the one? Shutter Island with Leonardo DiCaprio?
Yes.
Okay. So again, take a look. So what I would do is if I was going to put this one in, I would say the name of the movie is Shutter Island, right? So I would go and let's put this in together. Let's suppose I like Hitesh's choice. Let's suppose I would copy paste all the formatting from here to the next one. So this is what I would put in, right? So there it is. And I would make this number 11 because this is the next one. And I would call this Shutter Island. And then who makes it? So this is kind of interesting that here in IMDb, like when you look at this thing, it really doesn't tell you anywhere here who makes the movie. If you scroll down it shows you, the writers, the directors, the cast, and all that kind of stuff. But publishing house or studio, you really got to scroll down, and you might see it somewhere. But that's where I use, Metacritic, which is something that you can use. There's your Metascore, which is here. If you actually click on there, so Control click, it'll actually take you to the Metascore itself for Shutter Island. That's what it does. But it doesn't really do it and stuff. If I say Metacritic.com, and if I put Shutter Island in here, I kind of use both these two things. Right here it is, Shutter Island. It's giving you a 63. For Metacritic, it's good. That's a good score, right? Like it's usually a little bit harder than everyone else. And it tells me Paramount is what the thing is. So I know that Paramount Pictures is what I have to put in here. So this is actually correct by random luck, And then I'm going to go here into Shutter Island and Mystery Thriller. I'm going to put that in here. So I'm going to say Mystery, comma, and then Thriller, right? And then and this part is the directors. So you can see the director is Martin Scorsese. I like him. Martin Scorsese, right? And then writers is Laeta Kalogridis and Dennis Lehane. So I'm going to copy these. See if I can put that in here with any kind of... Okay, and make sure you remove spaces as much as you can. Now this is the actors. So this is like Leonardo DiCaprio. Again, you can kind of do the same thing. Just copy these three things here, copy them, and then kind of go in here and paste those. Just add in, oops, that didn't work. What happened? Shutter Island, IMDb. And that was weird, right? Full cast. I think I clicked on it. That's what happened. Okay, so let's try that again. So stars is this one. Wow. Wow, I didn't do that. Okay, let's try that again. Yeah. Doesn't like that. It's like it kind of clicked on it right away, which it didn't allow me to do. Oh, because of this thing here. Aha. It kind of takes that whole thing. I'll get the stars in there and I'll just remove it. It's okay. And let's try this again. So I'll say stars. I don't care about stars, but I do care about Leonardo DiCaprio. And oops, Emily Mortimer and Mark Ruffalo. There we go. So I got that year. Okay. And if you go look at IMDb, right, then year is 2010. Running time is 2 hours and 18 minutes. Sometimes you can look at this part here and it'll tell you the running time in minutes, 138 right there. So if you can't calculate that in your head, that's long. That's, usually movies 120 minutes, 18 minutes more, but it's Martin Scorsese, so you must have a reason why he did that, right? And then some kind of definition. It doesn't matter which one you take. If it's this one or if it's the other one, this is kind of the short description where you can put that here. And I'd recommend putting it up here, like in the line. So you have all that. It's an R-rated movie, and the rating is 8.2 on IMDb. I'm using IMDb ratings for these ones, but if you wanted to convert all my ratings into out of 5 or something, you can certainly do that. And it tells you that that's how it is. So that is how you put it in, right? And I recommend doing this all at once, including my data at the top, so that way you have less work later. Don't import twice. Why? Don't do it. Make it easy on yourself. Do it like this. Start off with something like this, add in all your movies, and you're good to go. This is your in-class exercise 3. Make sure you have a good list and those kind of thing. I think it's a good exercise for you guys to figure out. Again, more work with SQLite, with all that kind of stuff too, which is what we're doing here anyway. Questions around your movies. I'm keeping that one. Okay, Hitesh, I like that one actually. Shutter Island. Okay.
Thank you.
How about Kosochukwu, do you have a favorite movie that you wanted to tell me about since you're out here as well? Right? You don't have a favorite movie? You don't like movies? No? You know, younger
I'm
people.
I'm not a movie person.
You're
I'm
not a
not
movie
so
person.
big on
Oh, you're gonna
movies.
have a lot of trouble then finding 10. You have to find 10 movies you like, right? Right, Eric. How about you? What's a favorite movie for you since you're online here?
Um, favorite movie. That's a good
Any
question.
movie you like. What movie you like? Doesn't have to be your favorite.
Oh,
Favorite.
Spaceballs. Spaceballs.
Spaceballs. Oh, okay. Spaceball. That's a classic.
I actually
All right.
like the
That's
X-Men.
not.
The X-Men. Okay, sure. We'll put it
Yeah,
in that.
and
So
Fast and
That's not on your
Furious.
list, right?
Spaceballs is not.
Just checking.
Spaceballs, and then we'll say the X-Men because Chukwu said the X-Men. We'll do the X-Men too.
Yeah, X-Men.
So we'll say the X-Men. Here's the X-Men.
Fast and Furious.
Okay, well, one. Okay.
The Fast and
Okay.
Furious is
So
11 movies by itself, so you're set there.
right, here we go. So this is Spaceballs. Right, again, classic, 1987. Mel Brooks. That guy, I always found that he was, kind of underrated. Spaceballs, one word, right? So of course that's something that I got wrong. Spaceballs. We know that it's 1987, so we can get all the information that we have here. So 1987, and then we know it is. We don't know what's Paramount. Let's go here and put Spaceballs in here. Again, I use both to kind of put this stuff together. Now it's not rated high. Look, it's 46 Metascore, but mean user score 7.8. But it makes sense because it's a cult classic, right? So this is the stuff that I still think it's a funny movie. 96 minutes running time, and it's made by Metro Goldwyn Mayer, MGM. Let's just put MGM for us. So we'll say just to speed it up. So MGM, and the running time is like 98 minutes. I think is what it was. 96 minutes. And the rating is not rated. Let's see if it's not rated here. It says PG. So I go with IMDb for that. So I'll say it's PG, and that's over here. And then the IMDb rating 7.1. I'll keep that 7.1. And then what type of movie is it? Adventure, comedy, sci-fi. So adventure, alt, enter, right? That's what I do. Adventure, alt, enter, comedy, alt, enter, sci-fi, right? There it is, adventure, comedy, sci-fi. Who is the director? Mel Brooks. And of course, who is the writer? Mel Brooks. And who is the star? Mel Brooks, right? So he's kind of a bunch of things, right? So here's the writers. Mel Brooks is, again, in my opinion, underrated. But I'm waiting for History of the World Part 1. But, it is what it is.
I have a question, sir.
Yes.
So in a case where you need to probably modify a particular name in your database that appeared in different columns, for instance, you have Mel Brooks appear as a director and the writer column as well. So if you want to do like a query where you edit like the name or something around that, won't it cause some sort of a problem?
No.
Having that name in different columns.
No, it's just that, because some people can do that, right? You can be a director, a writer. Like if you were going to do a favorite books thing, right? Let's say you're making a favorite books, favorite TV shows or something like that, right? You'd have sometimes the writer and the director and the actor is the same one. What are you going to do?
Yeah,
right?
but representing them in the database like this, when you need to do something like modify the name, and you need to maybe do a query for that. I'm just thinking how it will actually work. Like, do you have to do it individually in those columns?
Yeah, you have something like where the writer is Mel Brooks and where the director is Mel Brooks and where the thing is Mel. Yeah, you could do that, right? But
if you're trying to change it, you say like the column name has to be this, and then you're changing it specifically inside of it.
Yeah, again, I don't think it's too difficult to do, but there you are. So this is Spaceball. So see the process. I'm showing you this process because I know you're going to go through this, and so that you see me doing it for people who not here or who aren't asking any question. Vivek's is flubber. Okay, you're a funny guy. But let's go with X-Men. All right, for a second. So the X-Men. So if you go to X-Men is this one. Is that the one you want? Right. This is the old one, 2000. And I still think that Hugh Jackman is my Wolverine. I know he's gonna be probably replaced over the next little while, but he's definitely my Wolverine. And so I know I'm gonna use this. So here it is, and we know it's made in 2000. So that's the first thing. So this is 2000. We know that Metacritic says that it is 104 minutes, so I don't have to think. I'm doing this because I don't have to think, right? We know the rating, right? They say PG-13. It's also PG-13. That's good. So that's, and the 7.3 on IMDb, which again, I like the movie a lot. So, I'm partial to the X-Men. It should be called X-Men, not the X-Men, because that's the name of the movie, right? And studio-wise, I think it's 20th Century Fox. So that's what it is. So that's what so 20th Century Fox. I already have that in there for you. And then the genre is action, adventure, sci-fi. So we have probably that action, adventure, sci-fi. It's right there. You can see that it just kind of picks it up in Excel. The director is Bryan Singer. Problematic. And writers are these people. But anyway, and you can always look up Bryan Singer and there's controversies around that guy, right? But whatever. And then Patrick Stewart. Again, I'm a fan of Patrick Stewart, so he's my favorite Professor X, but that's just me. But I don't think the other actor on mind is bad, and I think they're going to replace. Obviously, they clearly have to replace Patrick Stewart with somebody else. I mean, he's 80 something years old, and he can't do it. He can't hardly do Picard. So so that's pretty tough. So that's this. The only thing we're missing is this piece, and that's going to come from here. All right, I think that we got everything. Again, there's some issues, but whatever. So I wanted to give you a few of them, guys, for people that are out there to understand what you need to do. Yes, he is my favorite captain. Well, I don't know. I like Kirk in a lot of ways. If you're someone who's a Star Trek fan, I like Kirk because he's like, he's bold and it's all about him and he must do this thing the way he wants to, that kind of thing. Although I have to say that the latest captain for me, Captain Pike, the actor that plays Ensign Mount, is a great Captain Pike if you watch that kind of thing, if you're into Star Trek. And I think he's more of an evolved captain. I think I like Captain Pike the way they did him. Very different than the Cage, the original Star Trek, way that Jeffrey Hunter did. But that's a topic for another day if you're like into Star Trek. But yeah, he's definitely one of my favorite captains, Picard. All right, let's get into this. So that is this, and I did this for a reason. I wanted to show you guys some movies and how to put them in. I have a few people here that suggest something. I know that Vivek suggested Flubber. I'll leave that to you. But there's lots of them you can put. It doesn't even have to be a great movie. Maybe you want to put the worst movies of all time in your list. It doesn't matter to me. As long as you're having fun with it, it's a list that you're going to use for assignment 2. Please make sure that that's the way it's going to be. You need to have something like this. I haven't asked you for the Excel file. I'm not going to ask you for that. I could. I'm not going to do that. But I recommend keeping something like this so you can always recreate your data. You don't want to type it in by hand. All right, that is not the exercise. Please don't do that. Okay, that is going to waste your time, and it's just going to make the exercise completely unfun. I don't want that to be that way. All right, so that is this part. And any other questions around? I am trying to help you with your assignment. Think about it, and I haven't got into the technical stuff yet, and I'm going to kind of go through this. Okay, notes about the PowerPoint slides. Okay, I want to say this to you. Remember that the PowerPoint slides are for you. I've distilled the stuff from different books to put it together, so you have some stuff that you have to put in there and some different sources. And so remember, I'm not going to read these things 100%. I'm going to skip through, talk about it, and then this is your course. I recommend do a little bit of reading, go through PowerPoint slides. If you don't understand something, bring it up, right? but I'm not going to read every single slide. It takes too long, and it's boring as hell, right? So again, local data sources. The things to think about when it comes to local data sources, we're moving on to another topic now, is think about questions about how to use your data. Like, that's the way to think about this. Like, are you going to make it so that it's pretty simple to use? Is your data small, right? Are there any relationships in the data? If the answer is yes to some of those things, right, like it's small and there's no relationships, maybe no for one thing, maybe you don't want to use a SQL database, right? Maybe it's going to be something else. Maybe you need to use something like a flat file that has just some simple data. And so that's something you have to consider. How about privacy? One thing that we have that's different with mobile app development and in other cases is that privacy. Do you want to share this data from one app to the other app? Right? Do you want to have that? And if the answer is it doesn't matter, then it's okay. You can make it shareable. Or is it private? You can turn that on and off for Android and iOS. So let's talk about Android a little bit. There's 4 different types of strategies we're going to say for data management. 4, right? Which you guys should know. Some kind of app-specific storage, and this could be an internal or external file that you kind of have, whether the internal file is stored on a directory that's on your phone, or external storage like on an SD card. All right, and then shared storage. So that's going to share things like media, documents, stuff like that. Preferences, which is like, I look at preferences, and by the way, it's the same thing with iOS. Preferences is like it says key value store, and that's what it is. Think about it as a dictionary with key value. Did you guys ever do, Hitesh and Eric, did you guys do local storage when you did your computer programmer, analyst, whatever it was that you did?
I remember touching on it. We did so little Android stuff that like I don't really remember.
But I mean, like on web.
But
Did you guys use local storage on web? If you guys did any web at all, local storage.
Again, not a lot if we did.
So local storage on web and preferences, right, on Android and iOS, it really is a dictionary. And remember, whenever I talk dictionary or map, if you're talking C++ or even other languages, right, I always think about key value pairs, where the key in this case is a string, and the value can be whatever, right? Typically a string as well. Okay. So that's how you can store things in preferences, key value pairs. That's what you do there. Databases is the other one. And for, so here it says Android uses Room. And we're going to talk about Room in a second and what that is. In my mind, Room is kind of like, but not exactly like, core data on the iOS side. Okay, that's kind of what it is. And so it's interesting. It's a managed solution for SQLite, as opposed to using the lower level APIs, the API calls for SQLite, which is not recommended typically. Okay, that's what it is. So those are the high level solutions. If we think about access, for app specific files for Android, again, there's 2 options. One of them is a persistent file like that you're going to use, as well as a data cache. Okay, that's kind of like what you can use as well. That's something that's an option for Android. In internal storage, you have a directory, which is, there is a directory that's designed for your app's persistent files. And it does not require system permissions, which is, remember that Android is built on a Linux kernel, which is kind of similar in many ways to Mac OS, right? So that's kind of interesting. So it's built on a Linux kernel, and it's kind of like a small Linux box. That's what your Android phone is, right? And so it can have permissions or not if you want it to. And funny enough, they also use Android for VR. The Meta Quest can't use the Oculus. I like the Oculus more. I think Oculus is just a better name. But the Meta Quest, right, is it uses Android as a backend, a customized OS that's similar to Android. So we learn about Android and creating a PDB file and putting it onto an Android device like LD Player, then it's very similar how we pass that off to something like a MetaQuest. It's exactly the same. You can actually make an app that works on MetaQuest, and it's just an APK file. Just drag and drop it. It'll work, right? Which is kind of weird. So that's kind of how it works. So it does allow you to do internal storage that way, and there's going to be some stuff if you're putting it in internal storage. Other apps cannot access this data. Okay, so that's one thing, is that it's a good place for app data that you don't want to share. Okay, that's important for how you work with Android. So again, the way you do this is you use this thing called a files directory. That's what it is. And you can use a couple of ways to do this in Android. One of them is the file API, which is a low-level API. Okay, so the file API kind of looks like this, where you have in Kotlin. Talk about Kotlin. 2 languages for Android, right? Kotlin and Java, and one. You guys should know the history. Java and Kotlin. Why? What would we use? And you're saying this. Do you know why? Java and Kotlin. Why would they have 2 languages? Do you guys know the history?
Kotlin is Google's official language.
But why? Why do they bother? Right? Why do they do that? Why do they just stick with Java?
Because they want to have their own thing and not have Oracle to dictate.
Oracle has a lawsuit still that is they have rights to, they own Java, right? So, or it's not open source. It used to be open source, and people who own Java sent a note to Google saying, hey, Google, you can use our Java forever. It's okay, right? And then Oracle bought it and said, so what proof do you have that that Java gave it, people who owned Java before gave it to you? We have an email. They said, email? That's all you have? They took it to court, and the judge said, come on. All you have is an email. They gave you permission. You never got anything, no contract, nothing in writing. And Google's like, but we've been using it for years, and it's like no one said anything. And so it squatters' rights. And then the judge said, no, it's owned by Oracle now. It's up to Oracle. And Oracle basically said, look, you can use it Google for a while, but we're going to make it so that after a while, you're not going to be able to use Java unless you pay us something. And Google said, screw you, Oracle. I want to get my own language. And they went to the people at JetBrains, which are excellent people. I believe they're out in Ukraine, I think, actually, too. And they went to those people at JetBrains, and they said, hey, we want you to make this new language, Kotlin. Could you do it? And they're like, sure, because we're experts. And they made this language, Kotlin. And I think Kotlin is a sexy language. I'll be honest with you. I think it's a good language. It's an easy language to learn. I also like Java a lot. And there's a lot of Java out there. So your professors who are teaching you Android might be saying, hey, Java's out there, so we can't just abandon it. I agree, but I think you need to get on the Kotlin bandwagon as soon as possible. So that's why I'm presenting both here. Okay, enough said about that. So then you can see that here we have Kotlin. Here's an example of Kotlin, and I'm just going to zoom in here. And here you have Java, and you can see here you're actually instantiating an object type file. Here, that's what you're doing here. And here, it's not the case because Kotlin is using something called a val, which is kind of like a var in other languages, like, for Swift as an example. And this is kind of like it uses type inference here. Kotlin doesn't use the new keyword, just like Swift, right? So this is kind of inferred that you're instantiating an object of type file, right? But this part is exactly the same. The difference is that this uses files dir, and this is get files dir. This is a method, and this is built in as a property to the context, right? That's how it works. That's why Kotlin has been made this way. Kotlin has been made to make it simple. Kotlin has been made to make it logical and to reduce overhead. And that's why I like Kotlin a lot. But I also like Java. And I was programming in Android with Java for a long time, until Kotlin was the main thing now, right? And I think you guys should get on the Kotlin bandwagon. That's just me. Okay. Next, so store a file using a stream is better, right? Because they said, file API is cool, but, storing a file using a stream is probably the better way to go. And you can see here that here's Kotlin for storing a file as a stream. And you can see here Java. It's about the same length. Nothing that bad. But then here is the difference about, opening a file, accessing a file with the stream. If you want to access a file with a stream with Kotlin, it's like this many lines of code. Accessing a file with a stream with Java, well, now you're talking. Okay. And if you actually do this right, like there's, exception handling, blah, 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 whatever, which, one thing that I like about Kotlin is the type-safe language. It's quick, and it uses Lambda expressions natively, like this, right? Which I think is like, makes life a lot easier. And so to me, I would use Kotlin. But open file input is still the same thing on both sides. So you can see that open file input as a method that's built onto the context, or open file input as a method that's built into the context on Java is the same thing. Okay, so it's kind of the same thing, but it's used in different ways. Java uses string builder and blah, 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 and everything. Look here, it uses, again, string interpolation, and I just think it's just so much easier. So that's why I call it. All right, so that's using examples here. I'm showing you examples of what it would look like in both languages. So that's like Axis app specific files. So files on Android. Not a bad solution. You can read the file. Now, one thing I have to tell you is it really depends on how you encode and decode the file. All right. So encoding and decoding is part of what we do when we do persistent data on any mobile device. And encoding and decoding is usually called what? What is the fancy word for encoding and decoding that we use for any kind of data? Another word, yeah, Eric. Encryption.
Okay.
What is it? What else? Anyone else have other words for those things? Encrypting and decrypting, right? Encoding and decoding. There's also, here's the big one, serialization and deserialization. And that's what I want you guys to remember. Serialize and deserialize, because we're going to do the same thing with MongoDB. So we serialize and deserialize. We encrypt and decrypt. We encode and decode, right? Same things, whatever you want to call it. So think about this now. If I'm going to write something to binary format, or if I'm going to write something to text-based format, I need to encode it in some way. I need to serialize it in some way. I need to set it up so that maybe it's in CSV format. That's my method. Then when I read it back in, right, I need to read it back in some kind of file, right, in some kind of class or something, right, some kind of container object, right? So I need to read it back in as if I know how it's been written out, right? So please think about that when you start thinking about writing to a file and reading from a file, right? If I'm writing to a file that's comma separated, then I want to read from a file and I want to parse the file and ignore the commas and take each line as a different piece of data. And usually that's how we do it with flat files. Okay, so serialize and deserialize the same way. And a good example of that is if we do game data. So game data, let's think about game data for a second. I might have the name of an object, player, right? And maybe I have the X and Y coordinates, right? So let's say, I don't know, 100 and 100, right? And how would I encrypt that? Or how would I serialize that? I might say player space or comma, right? And then the X with the delimiter and the Y with the delimiter if I want to, or no delimiter, just the end. And when I read it in, I know that the player, the name of the object that I'm reading in is the first thing, and the second thing is the X, and the third thing is the Y. Those things, the way we're doing it is the way we're, doing this. So there's more to this, is what I'm saying. There's more than this. So yes, I've read the file, obviously, but now I gotta parse it. Okay, it's not just as simple as this. Okay, and why am I telling you this? Because that is a step. That is something you need to figure out. You need to parse the file somehow. By the way, that parsing sequence, it doesn't matter what kind of data you get. If you get it from a database or if you get it from somewhere else, you still need to figure out how to parse it and how to build it into some kind of object later on, right? That's a step. All right. So I also have shared storage. Shared storage has different things that we can use. We can use media content, and I'm not going to go through the detail here, but I've given you the link for the documentation if you want to do. They use something called the Media Store API, and the Media Store API is the ability for you to to read media like images and other things. It uses kind of blob type cache storage, which is kind of interesting to kind of read this kind of stuff in, and it stores it in a very efficient format. So take a look at that if you're interested in reading and saving media files, which is kind of cool. The next one is documents and other files. So shared storage can also be used for documents like a PDF. Sometimes we want to store a PDF document. or we want to store an EPUB, like if I want to make an audiobook reader or something like that, custom audiobook reader for my app, right? Then you might want to look at the storage access framework, right? Which is another way of doing things for Android. One thing I love about Android is the documentation is super succinct, lots of stuff out there, tons of examples, and they have great little frameworks for almost everything, similar to iOS, but maybe a little bit easier. And they also present stuff in both Kotlin and Java, which is really great, okay? So that's what I like about it. Data sets. So I want to store data sets, especially large data sets that I'm going to use for machine learning. I'm going to store it in with the Blob Storage Manager. There's another API, okay? So there's like different APIs for all this stuff. And again, I'm not going to go into detail how to do it, but it's there if you're interested in it. And your Android professor might go into more details about some of these. I won't, because I got to focus on a couple things. Otherwise, we could spend all semester just on Android. Shared preferences. We talked about this. You're kind of accessing a key value store like a dictionary that's built into Android. And one thing that you can do is you can be either private or shared. You can you can switch it on or off so that the shared preferences is used, only for one app or for all apps. Here's really great stuff. What you can do with shared preferences. Shared preferences also works with Unity, right? So this is kind of neat. If you're a game developer, right? And let's just go to Unity for a second. I use Unity a lot with game dev, right? I find Unity and mobile game dev is the way to go, right? More than Unreal, okay? And I'll tell you why. And now you guys are going to get Unreal, which is really cool. And Steve's going to do a great job of doing that with you guys in the second semester. So that's like next semester, right, for you guys, right? But to me, one thing I really love about Unity is its simplicity and the way it kind of combines things. One thing it does with Unity is it uses shared preferences. So if you actually read the Unity manual and say something like Unity shared preferences, right? If you actually do that, then you can see that there is a scripting API called PlayerPrefs in Unity, which is very similar to what we're talking about. It uses shared preferences, and it works on Android and iOS and Linux and WebGL and Windows. And one thing I love about Unity is it has a lot of different targets, whereas if you're making a mobile game, as opposed to Unreal has some limitations. And now some of you might be asking, wait, Tom, you mean you wouldn't make a game with Android native or with iOS native? And the answer is probably not my prototype. No. I'd make it with Unity. Why? It's a game engine. I don't have to work so hard. But we digress. Let's go back. So that's shared preferences. So that's kind of another way. So key value pairs or key value stores is what you want to use here. And you can do things like get shared preferences, which gives you a context. And the way it would look is in Kotlin and in Java, very similar. You say, hey, get preferences, and then you can indicate the context mode. I want the mode to be private, right, as an example. And then you can use put int. So I want to put an integer into the shared preferences value, right, where you specify the first part is always the key, which is a string, and the second part is always the value, which is whatever you want, okay? String, integer. Things to note, I have to talk about this. Things to note about storing data. Shared preferences can store quite a bit of data if you're smart. And I mean that in a nice way, right? And here's what I mean by that. If you store everything as a string type with shared preferences, iOS or Android, okay? And if I parse it with some kind of, and I store it as like JSON data. This is smart, right? So I store in the shared preferences, it's a string, but I store JSON data in there because it can be like a string. I can store large amounts of data with one string instead of having multiple shared preferences, which is dumb. Okay, sorry. A good example of that is player data again, right? Imagine I have the name of the player, X and Y and Z coordinates, rotation and scale, and I also have health and a bunch of other stuff for the player, right? It makes no sense for me to say player health, player location, player rotation, player blah, blah, and each of these things is a separate value. That doesn't make any sense. I'd rather have one value key, which would be like player, and then the value would be a JSON file, which I just parse again, take it into my app and parse it as JSON, and then woohoo, right? Got everything. So that's why I share preferences. Doesn't matter. iOS or Android is awesome, right? It makes it easy for us as developers, and it can store a good amount of data if you're careful on how you do it. Some examples of how to do this here. All right, good. Local database using Room. So this is interesting. So Room is a managed layer on top of SQLite. Okay, so we just talked about SQLite, and SQLite actually looks pretty ugly. The low-level commands for SQLite with Android, pretty ugly. iOS, even uglier, right? And I'm going to show you it, right? But with Room, it's actually really nice, right? So, and they have, Room is basically with Kotlin more than Java, right? Just saying, right? So just take a look. So Room database, again, it's like, it allows you to have really cool stuff. It verifies SQL queries for you right away. If it doesn't work, it'll tell you there's a problem. It does a lot more when it comes to migrating one database schema to another, which is what we were talking about earlier, migration of types. So I'm migrating a schema to another schema. I'm creating a new database, copying the old one, making a temporary database, and doing all this whatever. That's migration in many ways, right? Where we're updating a schema. And it does a lot of that for you built out of the box. And it kind of looks like this. You have a database class that holds the database and serves as the main access point, which is kind of cool. So database class, which is kind of cool. Data entities, again, which represents tables in the database, which is, again, good. That means it's object-oriented, right? So, again, a higher level than just, relational databases. And then something called data access objects that allow you to do things like CRUD, create, read, update, delete. That's awesome, right? So that is Room in a nutshell. I'm not going to go into the low-level calls for this, but it's really great. And we might use it this semester instead of using SQLite direct, right? Why? We know the SQLite commands, and Room can get it done easier. I'm all for easier, always. I'm put my hands up. I'm way more. I'm done with doing things hard. Like, I had a hard day today, guys, right? And I'm telling you, I'm all for easier, right? Okay. That's probably because of my age, because I'm done cutting grass. I'm going to pay someone to do that, right? It's one of those kind of things. Okay. Local data with iOS. Okay, let's talk about this a little bit. So we're comparing and contrasting the two now, okay? So there's something called the iOS sandbox, and I put a little bit of detail in here. I got another bunch of slides. I'm going to rush through it. But the iOS sandbox, it actually exists in a documents folder. And what you can do with iOS is you can actually use the Finder window to navigate to your home directory where you have your, you see your library folder. You can unhide your library folder. And inside your library folder, you're going to have this developer course simulator devices folder, right? And inside there, you have something called global unique identifiers, which basically identify that simulator. Interesting, right? And in that simulator is where they put all the data. So every simulator has its own sandbox. So they're all separate. And it kind of makes it so that it's kind of like a VM, but not a VM. Question, what is the difference between a simulator and an emulator? You guys are using both, right? Simulator for iOS, emulator for Android. What's the difference? Why do I just call them the same thing? Aren't they the same thing? Anybody? You don't know? ChatGPT. Let's do it. I know the answer, but let's look at ChatGPT. If I was going to ask this on a question, if I went back to ChatGPT and said, can you tell me the difference between an emulator and a simulator with a mobile app context? Okay, so tell me what that is. Certainly. Yeah, very nice. Very, very, very nice people. These ChatGPT people, right? Emulator. An emulator is a software program that replicates the hardware and software functionalities of a specific mobile device or platform. And it says that it mimics the entire mobile device, okay, including the processor, memory, operating system, blah, blah. Simulator, though, doesn't do that, right? It replicates the behavior of a mobile device, but not the hardware components at all. Which means if you want to access the camera, doesn't do that kind of stuff. Simulators are faster and more efficient compared to emulators because emulators take up more memory, and it's an actual VM. It's an actual device. It is the phone in many ways, right? And the downside, though, is that simulators, one thing I wanted to point out to you is when you use iOS and you use Xcode, let's go to Xcode. And I'm just going to go here, just going to close this down here. And let's do an example with the simulator. So I'm going to bring up Xcode for you, and I'm going to make a brand new Xcode project. Let's do this with me, guys. Do this. This is the next exercise, okay? And I want to make an app. Okay, here's my app. And I'm going to use, let's use me. And let's go with my product name. We'll call this MDEV1001 in the summer 2023 semester, and it's ICE. We'll call it in-class exercise, but it's not really an in-class exercise. We'll call it in-class exercise 3, just so I know what it is. And then we'll add the proper organization, so ca.Georgian College, right, which is the reverse DNS. It's reverse DNS order where CA, and then it kind of gives you a bundle identifier that's unique in the App Store. That's what it does. Okay, that's what this does. Storyboard, I want to use Swift. I'm not going to use core data, and I'm going to click on Next. Okay, so this is kind of what I want to do here. And let's store it here. Let's make a brand new folder in my desktop. And here we have ICEs. I don't know. I'll make a new folder for this. So new folder. We'll call it MDEV1001. Not ISIS. It's not to do with ISIS. Okay, just so we know. So let's make that so I can see. Here it is. And then I want to create that folder. And what you get with your Xcode and stuff, a couple things. At the top, this is similar to your manifest for Android. Okay, that's one thing you have to know. So right here, you can see that it supports out of the box iPhone, iPad, and Mac. Okay, and the answer is a lot of times you don't want to do this. So you can click on something like iPad and remove it. You can click on Mac and remove it. So all it kind of supports is iPhone. And then the other thing is, what's the orientation support that you want for your device? Do you want portrait, landscape left, and landscape right? Most of the time, we do not want to support upside down mode because upside down mode doesn't make any sense, right? So typically we leave that unchecked. Doesn't matter Android or iOS. Here I'm just using iOS, but it could be Android. And so landscape left and landscape right, that allows orientation detection and orientation changes where I actually switch the device left and right. Awesome. And then you can leave the rest. I mean, you can go into signing and capabilities and a bunch of other stuff here, but I'm going to do that. I'll leave it the same. And then in the new stuff, you get something called an appdelegate.swift file. And if you click here in the navigator, again, there's a bunch of these tabs here in Xcode, and each of these is a tab. You should consider it a tab, a separate tab for different information. So here you can see that here's your appdelegate.swift, and there's some automatic comments that you get with it, and it talks about importing UIKit. It's built into anything you do with Xcode for your storyboard version. Scene delegate is the other thing. You get a scene delegate as well. Typically, we don't touch these. Okay, typically when we start first coding with this, your view controller is the thing that you want to start off with, and your view did load. What's the analog? What's the analog for your view did load on Android? What's the same thing? What is it called? We're talking about the application lifecycle. What is it on Android? You guys remember? Should I bring it up? You guys should know these things, right? So, what is it?
It usually starts with a class, doesn't it?
Do you guys remember? Oh,
No,
here's Android. All right, hold on a
it's
second.
class, right? Like,
Hold on. Here's Android. Here's Android Studio. I don't know if this is the latest, probably not the latest version. All right, so I want to make a new project on Android Studio. Here we go. Okay, here's the new project. And I'm going to have phone and tablet, and we're going to make a empty activity, right? I'll make a basic activity with a, an action button here. Okay, so fab. And click next, and I'm going to call this, MDEV1001 in the, I don't know, summer 2023 semester. I'm going to say ICE 3. Doesn't matter. And then the save location, and this is the package name. This is wrong. We want to do the same thing, same treatment. We want to say ca.Georgian College.mdev. Blah 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 underscores are the right thing to do. Save location. Where is it going to put it? In Android Studio Project. I don't want it there. I'm probably going to put it. I'm just using Windows here. I'm going to probably put it in some other location, which makes more sense to me, like under Documents or under the desktop or something like that. That's what I want to do, right? And one thing I don't like about what this does is it does a very poor job of indexing. I'm not sure if you notice how slow this thing is. It's pretty slow to me, right? Indu says the start activity. Okay, hold on, Indu. See how long it takes for me. Maybe it doesn't take as long for you, but for me it takes a long time, right? While this is doing its thing, and it's going to take time, you know. But it says drag and drop a file into the space above quickly to locate it. Okay, hold on. Whoa. Quickly locate the file. Okay, I want to put it, I'll put it here in my documents, and I'll put it in my, or sorry, let's put it on my desktop, and let's make a brand new thing with, I'll make a brand new folder called MDEV1001. Oh, there it is. By the time I did that, it's like just done, right? M2023, and then put it there. Okay. And if I drag and drop it, I don't want to move it. I want to go into my desktop. So you can see that this is my users, me, and I want to look at desktop, wherever the hell that is. I'm probably passing it. It says downloads, favorites.
OneDrive desktop now, right?
Of course it is. OneDrive.
Yeah.
Suck. Okay. Georgian, and I'm going to go to there, and I'm going to press OK. There it is. Now, language is Kotlin, but it doesn't have to be. I know you guys are learning Java in your version, correct? Just for giggles, let's make it Kotlin, okay? And your app will run on 94.4% of devices. And remember that what you can do is help me choose, and it tells you how you can choose the version of your app. Again, you don't want to choose something like the latest version, because if I chose something like version 30, then it only run on 48% of devices. Not a good idea for Android. You want to go into the 90s if you're going to market your app, which means something like Oreo or later, right? My recommendation is probably something like even Marshmallow or later, all right? So, something like 23 is okay. Even 24 is good. I'm leaving it at Nougat. That's fine. 94% of devices. It says use legacy Android support libraries. No. I'm going to click finish, and it's going to do its thing. Okay. And again, guys, in your mind, my recommendation is for you. I want you to think about being platform agnostic as much as possible. Don't worry about the platform. It's going to be the same kind of things that you're doing. Wait till Android builds its stuff, because Android's going to go through its Gradle process. You can see that here there's an update from my IDE. I'm not going to do that right now. And let's let it do its thing. Here it is. There's your main activity, right? And the first thing that I was looking for is this piece right here, which is on create. Okay, that's what I was looking for, right? And actually, Indu put it in there before I had a chance to do that. It's very similar to, did you get that from ChatGPT? Right? Where did you get that? Right? Indu, you're awesome. Thank you. So here's on create, and you can see that on create has a bunch of stuff, and we're using something called, that fun button, that fab, right? That has here. One thing that Android is still doing its loading process. So it's always recommended to wait for Android to do its loading here, because what it's doing is it's structuring its, it's doing its dance. Let Android do its dance as much as possible. And you can see down here, it's still doing stuff, right? It's still loading. Wait, don't touch anything until this is done with Android, or you'll mess it up. Okay? But you can see with the fab and what Kotlin looks like, it's not completely unreadable. Like even for you Java people, you can probably figure it out. There's some differences. There's some changes. Like the difference between a var and a val. Right? What's the difference between a var and a val? There's a difference, right? And a val is kind of like a const, kind of, and a var is kind of like a variable. That's what it is. So that's what val is, more of a const. It does do type inference. That's what this is, right? However, once it's settled on what it is, don't think about a val, or a var like a var on JavaScript. It's not like that whatsoever. All right, similar to iOS or Swift. It's not like that. It's once you do type inference, it's set forever. Okay, it doesn't allow you. It's not a loosely typed language at all. Okay, so I'll let that build. But that's what we want. The onCreate. I'll come back to this. Back to this. Okay, so this is your view did load, and then you have this little funky stuff over here and everything else, and your super view did load. And a couple of things to note is your main storyboard, how it's connected, right? So this is stuff that you should have learned on the other side here. Again, one thing I like about the latest version of Xcode when it decides to do its thing is, yeah, there it is. You can move this around, and this is your, kind of a representation of your view controller. If you ever took any courses from Rich, you guys probably had Rich for your computer programmer at some point or whatever, or maybe even Jared. And if you didn't, and if you're a new person, that's okay too. What we normally call, there's two parts. There's the screen, right? And at the back end, there's the view controller. And I want you to think about the view controller as the code behind file. That's what it is, code behind file, right? So the view controller is connected to the screen, right? Or the scene, or activity, whatever. It's the same thing, right? And then if we go back to Android, so too is this, where we have our resources here, right? And I have my layout. Here's my layout, and I can look at my activity. And when I click on my activity, it's still working. If you look at your activity and stuff like this, there's a bunch of changes. I'm just going to ignore that, right? Then we can see, kind of information about how this works. So there's the navigation, there's the drawable. Here's your, if I click on this thing, here's your activity main, right? And there's on the top right, you can see that this could be split into a code, right, on the top right corner. So only code, which is XML format, you can split where you can see XML format on the left. And this is the design for your UI. And then design only, which is this part, right? And this reminds me in many ways of Scene Builder. If you ever did any Java, this is kind of what this looks like, Scene Builder, and a different kind of a specific Scene Builder for this. Right? That's how it looks like. And then each one of these things, activity, content, and fragment second, it uses fragments here, which is kind of a strategy for how to embed navigation with multiple scenes, but using one scene as multiple scenes. Kind of what it does, right? Kind of an interesting way of doing things. And it works just fine, right? And as you can see, there's your floating action button, which is, in this case, looks like an email button or whatever. But one thing to note is that whether it's iOS or Android, you have some kind of code behind file. In this case, it's your main activity. That's your main activity. On the iOS side, it's your view controller, right? And these are the things that control your storyboard, and or on Android, the activity here, the activity that's over here. It's the same thing, same process, where the activity maps to the main activity, and then your fragment first maps to first fragment. And these things are classes. So you can see the class looks like this. One thing that's different about Kotlin compared to Java is your constructor function is right here on the class, right? It's kind of on the top line. It took me a little bit of getting used to it. But when I first saw this, I was like, wow, okay. And remember our coding style, whenever we think about Kotlin or Java or iOS, underscore means private, all right? And typically when I program, I use M underscore, M denoting member variable, underscore means private member variable. And so you can look at your variable names and then instantly know what type it is, right? And you can even take it further, M underscore, B for Boolean, M underscore I for integer, M underscore F for float. You can do a lot of stuff like that. So the first part of your naming, your data members are encoded, so that way you can list all of them. Especially when you do things like type hinting, code hinting. You kind of type and you say M underscore, and all of a sudden pulls up a big list of things that you're meaning, right? Which is really neat. So kind of a way of doing things. Okay, and I'm pulling this up just because I wanted to show you what the difference in an emulator and a simulator is. And one thing that iOS has is a simulator app, right? This takes up a whole pile of memory on its own, and I don't like it. I'll be honest. I really prefer the emulator that's on Android in many ways. Simulator is lightweight, but it's an app, right? Which is kind of connects to the so kind of the same, just a different way of doing things. Almost like Apple decided, no, we're going to do everything different. I mean everything, right? Just cut. We're Apple. So that's what the difference between a simulator and an emulator is. And what this is telling you in Apple is you're looking at the simulator location, developer core simulator devices, when you run this thing. And the way that Apple works is at the top, you can specify the target, right, for your simulator. Here, I'm specifying an iPhone 14 Pro Max. That's the phone that I have. I want to specify the phone that I have. As an example, down here at the bottom, that is your size class. That's what this is. So you can, again, specify iPhone 14 Pro Max. There's also this, so that what you want to do is you want to match your size class to your simulator. This is important when you do that. If you don't, then what ends up happening is things that appear here is not WYSIWYG. It's not what you see is what you get, kind of thing. So please make sure you know that about iOS, that this and this must match. Similar to Android, right? And go back to Android. Remember, just like iOS, if I go to my activity main, then you can see that the target here is a pixel, okay? And you want to choose the phone that makes sense for you, even if you make your own custom phone that's here. It must match the type of emulator that you're using. If I'm using a Pixel here, and my AVD is a Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus, as an example, then you better make it so that it matches what this is here. Okay? That's what I recommend. Okay, so that's, or otherwise, what you see here is not what you're going to get on your Android device. It's going to look different from a UI perspective. Okay. Back to this. So your app sandbox is where it hangs out, and there's a file called a device.plist. Plist stands for preferences list, right? That's what it is, and it's what is it? Key value stores. That's what it is, yeah, right? Which is kind of interesting. Plist can be used for all kinds of stuff. Part of the app's configuration, right? Which tells you things that are allowed or not allowed, and it can also be used just to store data, right? So there's some file saving strategies, and so there's 4 persistent methods that you want to use, and that we want to talk about. So we can use a single file, right? So single file persistence, that's the first one, which is the easiest approach, and you can make it so it's an array or a dictionary if you really want to, right? So that's one thing, similar to Android. Okay, number 1. We can also do multiple file persistence, which is kind of interesting. So Android, it had a local directory. Here you can have multiple files, and this is another way of doing things. An example here is an email application might store each email message in its own file, right? So multiple files in a kind of in the sandbox. And you can also use a couple of additional things. Here's some additional types of strategies: property lists, object archives, SQLite 3, and core data. Right? Notice that core data is the last thing, and core data is very similar in your mind to RoomDB. Okay, that's what it's kind of like, right? And that's kind of cool. So property lists, again, they're key value pairs, and property lists are really great because they allow you to do things with different serializable objects. Here's that word, serializable. And here's something. What does NS stand for on the iOS side, guys? Anybody know? iOS, NS, what does it stand for? It's a funky thing from throwback back in the day. NS, you see that all the time with more advanced types. What is it?
Namespace? Or is that a different?
No, and people don't know. No, it actually is Objective-C, right? So Swift is a fairly new language, right? So iOS uses Objective-C. And the way, I used to anyway. And they've started moving over more and more classes over to Swift. But back in the day, NS stood for Next Step, which is a whole different programming language that Steve Jobs made for his Next Step computers, right? And this is where iOS came from in Swift, right? So you're going to see a lot of these remnants of these old languages. NS, next step. And so whenever we see NS in your mind, think about Objective-C. Okay, I'm connecting somehow to an Objective-C class. That's what you're doing with Swift, right? Absolutely. Even Cocoa frameworks, because they use Objective-C on the back end, right? So anything like NS mutable array, right? Or NS array, or NS dictionary, or NS whatever, anything you see NS in your mind, think Objective-C, all right? Think about that old stuff, Cocoa frameworks, the old stuff. And there's a lot of stuff that's being used here with NS, okay? Property list serialization. We talked about how to serialize and deserialize. I've given you some examples here. Let is different than var, right? Where let in Swift is what? What is let? What does let mean in Swift?
It's a constant.
Const, right? Which is interesting because it's confusing because depending on the language you're using, now you're saying, well, let is like val in Kotlin, right? And var is like var in Kotlin, which is kind of cool. And var, but is not like var in JavaScript. Var is like type safe. Okay, it's pretty good. So they have funny things where let array and then colon means is of type NS array, and then we're assigning an array of integers. So we can see that this is an NS array of type integer, which is interesting. Without the angle brackets that we'd see in like Java or C# or C++ or something like that, where the angle brackets mean type of, right, or generic type. So that's one thing. Property list serialization, there's different approaches to this. I'm not going to go into that, but there is some information here that you should read about property list serialization. There's also something called model objects. You can archive model objects. One thing to notice, they must comply with something called NS coding. It's like a protocol. Protocols in Swift are interfaces in other languages. And Apple always says they prefer protocol-oriented programming over object-oriented programming. They'd rather do, composition over inheritance any day. Maybe we'll talk about that a little later, right? But that's what they talk about. That's Apple's methodology. And they say how to conform to NS coding. Well, what you need to do is you need to have my object class must inherit from NS object and must implement NS coding and NS copying, where NS coding and NS copying is the protocols or interfaces that you're going to implement here. And they must include other things like, for example, some kind of encoding function and some kind of decoding function. Okay. Skipping. Okay, I'm not going to go into too much detail here. There's a lot here about NS coding. How about iOS's embedded SQLite 3? Well, there's a lot you can do with SQLite 3, right? And this is pretty good. It's also capable of doing complex aggregations and everything else. And I just wanted to show you that, it's good, but they say here there is currently several ORM tools available for Cocoa Touch, right? Cocoa Touch being the father or mother of modern Swift and everything else, right? And they still exist today. All the foundational classes are done with something called Cocoa Touch. This is what they used to be called, right? And I'm not sure if you learned about Cocoa Touch in your iOS course or at all. I'm not sure, right? But you may have not. And so your Cocoa Touch classes, which are all those things, is really the foundation of everything we do. And it says that ORM tools, which is object relational mapping, we talked about this, which is kind of a mapping, high-level map compared to the low-level tools we're using for SQLite. What they're talking about here is core data, right? Which is right here. Apple calls it core data, and Android calls it room. It's the same kind of idea, okay? So this is the analogy here. And here's some examples of what this might look like if I were going to do SQLite by hand. I know we're running a little bit late, guys. Bear with me while we finish this off. Here's var database, and we have something called an opaque pointer. Woohoo! Right? And if you've never seen this kind of thing, you're setting it to nil. They can't use null because that would make Apple just like similar to any other language. They need to use nil, right? Just to be different. And the question mark, remember that what the question mark means is it's implicitly unwrapped, right, is what it says. It's an optional. It says optionally, this is nil, right, is what this tells. And then basically what you're doing is you're using the SQLite3 open command to check to see if the data file path exists with the database. And notice this ampersand at the beginning of the database. It's a reference, right? Back to the old C#, C++, da-da-da. Very, very simple and very low level. And that's why we don't use this stuff anymore, right? Exactly. It's representing C pointers, right? Which to me, we don't want to use pointers. Anything we do, and they've moved away from this, they want you to use core data. They don't want you to use SQLite at all directly. Both languages, by the way, both platforms, they say, stay away from SQLite. It's good, but it's too low level for you to use. It's better for you to use core data or Room, and that's what we're going to do next week. We're going to focus on Room and core data, not on SQLite. And the reason for this is because SQLite is good. We've learned about it, and we're still going to do that. All the underlying stuff you're doing with SQLite is still good. It just doesn't make sense in today's world, right? We're not going to do it. All right, so here they use things like unsafe mutable pointers of type opaque pointer, and there's a bunch of other crazy stuff. We're not going to do that. Moving on. How to open a database. It tells you, look, there's actually a SQL query right here. Create table if not exist fields plus row integer primary key field data text, right? It's like, I mean, yes, this is awesome. They also talk about something called binds, bind variables, which is something you might see in Java if you're using SQL or SQLite or other things. And what binds do is they use a question mark to denote where in the SQL query you're going to inject a variable. So a good example would be something like this, where we want to use a preparation statement, right? So it doesn't matter whether you're using Java or here Swift. You have the statement that you want to create. So here's your SQL statement. Insert into foo. That's your table, right? Here are your values. This is exactly the same as what we saw on the command line. And then in these little question marks, this is where we're going to insert the variables. That's what this is. These are variables. And we take this SQL statement. Here it is. This is the database we want to use. And we take a reference to the statement itself. That's what this is. The statement being an opaque pointer, where we're going to store the result, right? And we're going to say, okay, cool. When we do this, right, the first location, that's what this stands for, this first location is where we're going to inject the value of 235. That's what this is, right? And the second location, the second little variable injection point is where we're going to store bar, right? That's what this means, right? And if we can do this when we prepare the statement, then it returns, if it returns true, then we're good. Otherwise, if it doesn't, then we're going to skip all this stuff. And we're going to finally finalize the statement. So we prepare the statement in Swift, and you might have seen this if you've done any kind of database work before, where we do statement preparation, and then we execute the statement. That's a step we do with SQLite. We prepare and execute, okay? And then we finalize. We stop, we save everything or whatever, right? And this idea is the exact same in Swift, or you might look at the Android documentation. It might look very similar in terms of the things that it does. Might be bigger, right, if it's in Java, and a little bit smaller if it's in Kotlin. Okay, that's what it looks like. But more or less, you're going to see something like this. So core data is the way we want to do this. Is a full-featured persistent data tool. This is what we want to use, just like we want to use Room. I'm sorry, I'm rushing. It uses entities and managed objects as opposed to what it does before. It uses something called a data model editor, which means we have a user interface to help us with our data. And that's awesome. Look, give me all the user interfaces you can give me when it comes to managing a database, okay? I don't want to manage databases by hand. It's okay. It's good for learning, but it's not practical. So this is kind of neat that it gives you this out of the box. And core data, again, once you do it, it creates a subclass of NS objects back to NS coding and NS copying. And the way this would look, I'm just going to skip down here so you can see what it looks like from a context perspective. I'm giving you a little bit of code to look at. It kind of looks like this. We have our app delegate, and then what we want to do is we want to do a context fetch request, and we want to fetch whatever that request is going to be. The request is going to actually create this NS managed object context. It looks really complex, but actually it only happens once. And then once we do this kind of thing, we're able to use fetch fetch commands to kind of use a SQL kind of syntax, which is kind of very easy. A lot of the stuff we do has almost no code related to it whatsoever because it's very visual, almost like drag and drop. And that's why we use Room, and that's why you use Core Data. And at the back end, it uses SQLite. And the reason why you want to know about the SQLite part is because, hey, maybe I want to do a custom query. How does that look? How do I take this query that I learned about in SQL? How do I convert that into something that is like, going to work with Room or with Core Data? One thing I've also done here as a review for you guys to help you is I just wanted to put in place here in the documentation how to do certain things. And I've given you some examples with my own computer, how to do that, how to do a quit command, how to delete stuff, what the basic data types are for SQLite. They use 5 basic storage classes that you see here. You can also use other ones as well. And how to create a table, how to insert data into a table, how to retrieve data from a table. We've done all this work before. This is just here so you can have a reference to what this looks like. And I've given you some examples of that movie list, a shortened version of the movie list that we have here. How to add a column to a table. There's that add column stuff, that alter command. Alter table movies, add column rating text. Just does it, right? And then you can also use schema movies to kind of test to see what that schema looks like. Okay, that's kind of what it looks like. And updating a column. How do I change it? I want to update movies, set rating. Maybe it's empty, like description, and I want to set it to something where the title. This is actually a query where the title is equal to Blade Runner. So here's the first query that you see. I want to update a specific movie in a record with a rating of 8.1. Set the rating to 8.1 where the title is Blade Runner. Set the rating as 8.6 where the title is Star Wars, and so on. Okay, and now you can see the result. So I wanted to put that in place here so you can see it. As a summary, integrating SQLite with any operating system or framework or language is like this. There's 4 little steps. Design your database first. We talked about that last week. Connect your app to the database at runtime. Okay, that's going to be something we're going to do next time, right? Use the connection to create, read, update, and delete, and do full CRUD on your app. And the 4th thing is use results in some kind of operation in your app. So you're going to get some results back. And this may consist of, and this is important, refreshing the interface by adding or removing items, or it may consist of working with data in a new item or in anything else you and your users require. So it's going to be some additional manipulation here beyond, and I'm nicely freezing, beyond which we've done in the past. Okay? And that's it. Okay, so that's my lecture for today. In class exercise 3, just to specify and to clarify, the only thing I want you guys to do is put in your all the data for your 10 movies. Do it today. Don't wait. It's your I'm paying you twice for it. I'm paying you 4% to do it, and I'm paying you more again next time to do it in your assignment. And why am I doing this? Because I know somebody's not going to do this in class exercise 3. Right? They're not going to do it. They're going to skip it. They're not going to do it. They're going to forget about it. And please, guys, I know people are asking me like, Professor, can you please give me an extension on your in-class exercise? Your in-class exercise is actually due tonight. That's why it's called in-class exercise, right? I'm giving you until Sunday to get it done. The due date is now, all right? It's not Sunday. Sunday is your last day you can submit it, okay? That's why I do it. So don't ask me for extensions. You have the entire week to get it done. We're sitting at Wednesday. You have Wednesday night, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday to get it done. All those days, it's due tonight. Get it done as soon as possible. I have a question. Is Core Data always using an SQLite database behind the scenes? No, you can choose to make it something else if you really want to, right? You could make it use other things, but it's not recommended. SQLite makes it the best because it actually allows you to do relations and all this other stuff, right? But you can choose a different backend. Okay. All right. Any other questions before we go for the day? Okay, so
I have a quick
go.
question about this in-class activity here, right? When we add all the 10 movies in the Excel sheet and we have to add it to the database,
Yeah.
we have to remove that movie ID initially, right? Then take that and then do it because that was the way that we finalized.
Well,
Like,
see, so this is what we talked about. We talked about different strategies around that. And this is where I want you to think about it. Because look, you got to do it now because you're not going to have a chance to do it, right? So different strategies around that. You could remove the the thing. You could make it so you make the schema first. I recommend doing the schema first, so you have your schema, and then import the database. That's the best way to do it. Okay. Sorry, I know I'm cutting out here for some reason, but it is what it is. Right. It's probably because I'm streaming and streaming and streaming. Right. All right. Any other questions? Yes, Eric.
Just to be clear, what has like does this have to be uploaded to GitHub as well?
Yep.
Like, is that just the Excel file or the data?
No. Your database file only is what I really want to see. Your database, your Excel file is optional. If you want to give me your Excel file, you can. But I'm really looking at your database, and I want to see you demonstrate it. I want you to do a little query, show me what it looks like, that kind of stuff. Talk about your database a little bit. And 1 minute, 2 minutes max. I don't want. Don't make it too complex. Right. Okay. Any other questions online? And guys, if you think about something else, yeah.
Yeah, actually, I have missed my in-class exercise too. Now there's no link to submit that. Can you please provide me the link for ICE2?
There is no link anymore. You've missed in-class exercise 2. It's gone. Right? Like I said, you have. Remember that you all have, 2 misses that you can get for free. And you still get 100%. So if you missed it, sorry, move on. Right? You still got the rest of the 10 to still get 100%.
Yeah,
okay?
I know, but I have to do that.
Don't worry about it. You're going to be fine. You're going to be okay, Jesleen. There is no going back. You're going to go forward. Right? That's how it is. Right? So those things are gone.
I know.
You still get 100%. Just do the rest of the 10, and you're good to go. Okay? You have nothing to lose. And if I do 9, listen, here's a promise that I'm going to make you. If I do any less than 10 left, I'll always give you 2 to discard. So if I do 9, I'll only count 7, and I'll take away the other 2. All right? It'll be like that. I'll always give you the benefit of the doubt. Don't worry. I got you. All right? But going forward, you need to do them all. Every other thing that you do, I recommend doing every one of your in-class exercises as soon as you can.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Hopefully that was okay. I know that we are dropping a few frames here. I think it's because of the bandwidth limitations that I'm experiencing right now. Probably my little guy's streaming or he's doing something else upstairs. And one day, when we get fiber to the home up here, it won't be an issue. But for now, it is. Guys, thank you so much for sticking around, and I appreciate the fact that we went over about 10 minutes. Looking forward to seeing you guys all tomorrow morning. Remember, tomorrow morning we are in person. I will solve my issue by tomorrow morning, and there shouldn't be an issue. Yeah, I could, Eric. Usually what I do is I put together a little document. But the thing is, it really depends on how much I get done. And today was one of those stupid days that I couldn't get too much done, and I'm sorry about that. So yes, I will. I'll try very hard to put together a little document for you. But pretty much it's the in-class exercises are pretty easy. You follow along what we did, and then you're good to go, right? So it's practice. I want you to practice and play with the material. Next week, before we go, just keep in mind, a couple things are going to happen next week. One, I may elect to do some kind of user interface with either and or both Android and iOS. Please have Xcode and Android Studio ready for me by next week, okay? If you don't have them installed. So for whatever reason, because we may do something like that. We need to connect to it somehow at some point. Okay, so we might provide a little interface for that, and very silly interface even. Doesn't matter. We still need you to do something where you can see the data. Okay, so please be prepared for next week. Otherwise, I'll see you all tomorrow morning, the people who are in my project class. Okay, thanks so much, guys. Appreciate everything, and see you tomorrow. Take care. I'll stop recording now.